welcome to the Teaching Together podcast, where we celebrate and share the glows and grows of teacher life. I'm Sierra.
And I'm Grayce.
Each episode on the podcast, we like to share a glow or grow from our teaching week or something that's been happening in our teacher lives. So Grayce, can you kick us off?
I would love to kick us off. I think it's a glow, and actually very relevant to our episode today. I am going through my Proficient Accreditation process, and part of that is being observed teaching by my principal, and that happened this morning. Period 1, got it out of the way immediately, and I was actually surprised at how well it went. I don't know why, because I spent a lot of time writing this lesson and trying to make sure it was a good, high-quality lesson that I would want my employer to observe me teaching. But I was really proud of my kids. I thought being in kindergarten and having the principal of the school arrive, I thought they would be way more distracted by his presence than they actually were. They really put on a very good show for him. It wasn't a show. They were genuinely learning. But you know how it is. I haven't been observed now for a year since finishing my degree and being able to legally teach on my own. So it was interesting to have someone in the classroom again. I was very conscious of where he was at all times. But I was really proud of how my kids did all the activities, and I got them to do lots of group work and lots of different transitions in different places of the room and all that kind of stuff. We started off in small groups, and then we were in a circle, and then we were sitting on the floor looking at the screen, and then we did more small groups, and then we read a story. And I was also very proud of this lesson that I wrote because I didn't have to change anything on the fly like I normally do when I've written something for the first time and haven't actually taught it and gone, well, in theory, this is how I would do it, but let me tweak it once I've taught it. And I didn't have to tweak anything in the moment, which is good because that lesson plan is submitted as part of my observation, which we'll get to later. But I was teaching the lesson and I was like, damn, this is a good lesson. But there's always that feeling of, am I actually accurately gauging my abilities? I'm obviously so biased for a variety of reasons. Am I actually looking at my teaching properly? And but yeah, on the whole, it actually honestly went better than I thought it would. Just the quality of the lesson, I was like, damn, I wrote a good lesson. So that was really nice.
So good.
Thank you. Do you have a glow or a grow for us, Sierra?
I think mine's going to be a grow. I've been reflecting the last couple of weeks this term just about my Year 7 classes who I'm really enjoying teaching. They are just delightful. I've got 2 different classes. But they are just so nervous about making mistakes, and so you can just see the devastation on their faces when things don't turn out the way that they hoped. And it's just really hard because I think I've worked really hard as a teacher to try not to be that person who just swoops in and saves the day and does it for them. But because they're so nervous about it, I don't want my demeanor or my approach to mistakes in terms of trying to flip things back to them to make them be better problem solvers, to be misread by them as me not caring because they care so much. So anyway, I think that's just a growth for me, trying to think about my own typical approach and how I can make sure I'm caring for them, but also setting appropriate expectations around errors and learning in my classroom.
Yeah, that is so hard. It's really hard to strike that balance and create an error climate, and you've got to be so intentional about the things you say and do and the expression on your face, and it's full on.
So if you haven't listened to our episode on error climate, you might want to scroll back a few and find that one. Also, in our last episode, I had a chat with Tom Marnie, who's a PhD student or candidate at Deakin University, for a really interesting chat about educational ideologies. We also spoke about this semi-recently because it's been a big topic in my master's degree at the moment. But just thinking about what are the driving forces behind education and the different kind of approaches and perspectives that people hold about what education is for. So that was a really thought-provoking chat that I had with him, and just diving into a little bit about the context of his PhD and what he's looking into in terms of teacher agency and how much, I guess, control we have in a setting where a school or a state or a country might have a specific educational ideology that's kind of driving what they do. And we find ourselves as teachers and professionals kind of situated in those spaces and have to work out how do our values and opinions on education align or not align with the environments we find ourselves in. So no real hardcore practical tips in that one, but very interesting, thought-provoking discussion. So if you missed it, make sure you go back and have a look.
Today, we are exploring the Proficient Teacher Accreditation process in New South Wales. We're going to talk through our own experiences. Sierra has already completed hers. She's already proficient, lucky her. And I am currently, obviously, as of today, and I am currently, obviously, going through that process. So this is going to be quite a practical episode. We'll both reflect on what worked for us, and we're also going to have a look at just briefly what this looks like in other states, and hopefully just arm you with some practical approaches if you are going through this process or supporting someone who is. But before we dive in, it's time for tea.
We are currently sharing a pot of my absolutely favourite new tea, which is a T2 tea. It's elderflower and peach, which is a delightful blend of our different tea preferences. Grayce has a tendency to go for more floral green teas, and I lean towards more black teas or fruity teas. But I am really enjoying this because it kind of has a little bit of that black tea bitter aftertaste or base with really nice peachy flavour, but it's not like overwhelmingly sweet.
Yeah, I was literally thinking those exact words. Like, I find that Paxa peach from T2 is full on, and I don't like it for that reason. But this, even though it does have peach in it, it's just a little more subdued. Like, it's still quite sweet, but it's enjoyably so.
We also have the pot sitting on my mug warmer, which was my birthday present from last year. Thank you to Grayce, to keep our pot warm and toasty so that the tea can continue to flow as we embark on this exciting conversation of accreditation. So what is Proficient Teacher Accreditation? You've probably heard it mentioned, or at least heard something about teacher accreditation, because teacher accreditation, I guess, can kind of get thrown around in a few different ways. It's often referred to when we're talking about accreditation cycles or maintenance cycles. You might have heard that phrase. And if you are working alongside teachers who are already proficient, then they go through, here in New South Wales, 5-year maintenance cycles. So this is where our professional development hours comes in. So the whole idea of needing 100 hours of professional development every 5 years forms part of your maintenance cycle and allows you to maintain your level of accreditation. Once you're proficient, you stay at that level unless you choose to go up any of the other levels. But everybody has to get to Proficient Teacher Accreditation. So it's based on the Australian Professional Teacher Standards, which, by the way, are usually referenced in all of our show notes about which standards relate to the episode so that you can log some sneaky fun PD. So make sure you check those if you haven't recently. But these were designed and are governed by APSTs, which is the Australian Institute for Teaching and School Leadership. Not ACARA and not NESA. So, everybody has kind of their own acronyms and there's too many different organisations. But APSTs have the Australian Professional Standards for teachers, and then each of the states and territories kind of use those to form the basis of their accreditation processes. These standards are made up of 4 career stages, and APSTs says that they are designed to help you understand and develop your teaching practice and expertise as you grow as a teacher. To graduate from university, you need to demonstrate that you've met the standards in the graduate teacher column, and we'll link a copy of the standards to our show notes as well so that you can have a look at the overview if you're not super familiar with it. But there are 4 columns, and the first column are the graduate teacher standards column. And as a part of initial teacher education requirements in Australia, universities actually have to conduct some kind of performance assessment that assesses you against those graduate standards. So this is where we have things like the GTPA, which we've also spoken about before. That's the Graduate Teacher Performance Assessment, or the TPA, Teacher Performance Assessment. Some unis run like a similar thing, but they just call it a TPA, and other universities would have their own variation of it if they don't do one of these kinds. But essentially, they are required to make sure that you are assessed against those graduate teacher standards before you leave university and start teaching in a school. Moving to Proficient Accreditation is the next column or career stage in these standards. And if you have a look at the standard descriptors, the main shift is simply that you're going from understanding the ideas and concepts, for example, demonstrate knowledge and understanding of the physical, social, and intellectual development and characteristics of students. That's a graduate standard. But then the proficient equivalent of that is that you actually use strategies that are based on the knowledge of students' physical, social, and intellectual development. So the main differentiator between a graduate standard and a proficient standard is that you're moving from just showing that you understand the ideas and concepts to actually being able to demonstrate that you do those things consistently. There's probably a lot of the standards that we already are kind of doing at a proficient level when you're relatively fresh to teaching, especially if you care about doing your job well. But each state or jurisdiction does have their own specific pathway for how you can demonstrate that you've achieved these proficient standards and therefore obtain your proficient teacher status. They share a lot of similarities because they're based on these same standards. So these are the Australian standards. So regardless of where you find yourself in Australia, it will essentially be looking at the same kind of thing, but with slightly different pathways to get there. Today, because we are both teachers in New South Wales, and that's the process we have been and are going through, we're going to focus more on the New South Wales approach, but hopefully you will find this episode useful regardless of where you teach.
So one of the things that's actually somewhat relevant to Proficient Accreditation is whether you have right now provisional or conditional accreditation before you start the Proficient Accreditation process.
So many words.
So many words. And this is important only because there's a slight difference in how much time you have to complete your Proficient Accreditation. So if you are provisionally accredited, that means that you applied for accreditation after you finished your uni degree. You have to have graduated from a NESA approved or accredited institution. So they need to say, yes, we agree with your degree that it's good teaching or whatever. And once you've got your transcript, you can start applying for provisional accreditation. And if you are awarded that, you get 3 years if you're employed as a full-time teacher, or 5 years if you're casual or part-time, within which to complete your Proficient Teacher Accreditation. The difference with conditionally accredited teachers, which is what I was, and I guess technically still am, is that you get 4 years to complete your Proficient Accreditation if you're full-time employed, or 6 years if you're casual. And what's the difference between being provisionally accredited or conditionally accredited is where, like I said, provisional accreditation is applied for after you get your qualification. Conditional accreditation is applied for. I applied for mine in my last year of my degree. So it says on the NESA website, it says you can apply for conditional accreditation if you've completed a substantial part of an accredited degree. It says, for example, at least 3/4 of an undergraduate or 1/2 of a graduate degree, or if you've been awarded a non-teaching bachelor degree and you've got an offer of employment from a school. And as a conditionally accredited teacher, you still need to complete and be awarded your teaching degree so that you can become a proficient teacher. I was an eager beaver and also broke and also really hating working in where I was working. And so I really wanted to be able to casual teach, and I needed my conditional accreditation to do that. So I applied for conditional accreditation as soon as I could. And yeah, so now I'm still conditionally accredited. And they kind of, I don't know why they do this, but they send a warning to you that you've got 1 year to become provisionally accredited from the date of your conditional accreditation. But you don't actually have to do anything. You'll just stay conditionally accredited even if that year expires. Until you apply for proficient accreditation. So the real difference is you have less time, you have one less year to complete your proficient accreditation if you're provisionally accredited versus conditionally accredited. One last caveat, which actually I encountered when I tried to apply for proficient accreditation last year, is that NESA recommends you've taught for at least 160 days before applying for a proficient teacher. I approached my principal with one of the other girls at my school and last year and said, I want to get started now. And I was in my first year of teaching, and he said, I would prefer that you wait. So I did. And so I'm doing it now instead. Yeah. So those are kind of just some nitpicky things that you need to know because they will impact the beginning of your accreditation process. But really, in the grand scheme of things, the impact is minimal.
Different states and territories also have different requirements on how much time you have before you demonstrate proficient teacher accreditation. So I know, for example, Victoria, they only give them 2 years to achieve proficient status. Other states have 5 years. So we're going to come back a little bit towards the end about a quick comparison with some of the other states once we've spoken a bit more about the process. But it's just really important for you to know, wherever you are in your context, how much time you have from the time you first obtain your initial level of accreditation, whatever that is, before you have to demonstrate proficient teacher status. Like I said before, I really think that a lot of graduate teachers would be demonstrating the proficient teacher standards. It's more about going through the rigmarole of the actual process. And I think that's one of the main inhibitors that actually stop people from getting started, because it can be quite an overwhelming process. And having looked at the NESA website recently at what's involved in going through the process to become proficient, they actually don't make it particularly clear. And it's like you get to one web page and you scroll down to the bottom, there's a link to another one, and then it links you to a different site, and then that page links you to a different spot, and that page links you to a different spot, and then you've got to have like 7 million tabs open so that you can keep all the resources and remember which one relates to what. And it's actually quite tedious. Once you actually sit down and decide that you're going to do it, I really think it's quite achievable. And we're going to chat about a few strategies you can use to just kind of sit down and commit to it. One of the biggest drivers for why you should do it is obviously because it's a requirement. And whether you've got 5 years to do it or 2 years to do it, you'll need to do it. And then I guess the next biggest motivator is that you actually get a pay rise,
which is honestly one of my big ones, which is why I wanted to apply for it last year, because I was like, I'm living out of home. I have bills to pay. I'm a working woman. I've got things to do. And my principal very kindly did say, there's a scheduled pay rise coming up anyway. Don't worry. And I was like, but I just really want my proficient accreditation one, and also just to get it out of the way. But yes, there is a nice pay rise that comes with it. And you also get a little NESA certificate that says you're a real teacher now.
Oh, it's really pretty. It's got a nice little, shiny thing on it. It makes me feel very special and important. It sits up on my desk, squashed between a bunch of other books and folders and paperwork, and it's really not that special, but it's fun to get.
So shall we jump into the step-by-step?
Let's.
let's jump in. So there are 5 steps. And actually, when you break it down, the process is actually quite simple. The first thing you need to do is complete the orientation module, which NESA runs, and it's mandatory. Please do it. You can't do Proficient Accreditation if you don't. And it just kind of goes through the basics of this is what you need to know. I did this last year because I was super eager, because once you do it, it doesn't expire. Like, you don't have to do it within a certain amount of time or whatever. So I just did it, and it takes you through the standards and the standard descriptors, and you write some stuff, and I've already forgotten it, but it was very chill and that's not part of your overall submission at the end. It's an orientation module. It's designed to orient you in this process.
Really interestingly, NESA actually recommends that you complete the orientation module within 3 months of becoming provisionally or conditionally accredited. So that's like quite early on from when you actually start teaching, despite the fact that they say that you should teach for 160 days at a minimum before you actually begin the process. But I guess the idea there is that they want to really unpack what it is that Proficient Accreditation is, because once you start working in a school, you hear lots about PD and hours and maintenance and all these things, and it's kind of like, I remember thinking, oh my goodness, how does this relate to me, and where do I have to log my PD? And someone explaining to me, actually, no, any PD that you do until you're proficient is actually just, I don't want to say invalid because I love PD, but
you can't log it anywhere.
You can't log it. It actually doesn't count to any of your hours until you're proficient and you begin that 5-year maintenance cycle. But do PD because it's good for you and it's going to help you to become a proficient teacher. But it's not about logging it or tracking your hours at this point. So I thought that was interesting.
Yes, and I do remember in a staff meeting, we were being shown how to log a specific type of PD that we'd all done. And I was like, why is it not coming up on my ETAMs? And that's because I am still conditionally accredited. Woe is me. Anyway, after you've completed your orientation module, there'll be in ETAMs, which is the NESA, like that's where you maintain your accreditation. It's the online portal. That's the word I'm looking for. There's an option to send an email to your principal. Well, that's not an option. It will send an email to your principal and say you're ready. And my principal is my accreditation supervisor. It doesn't have to be, but my school's relatively small, so that's just who it is. And then this is the big bit. This is the collect your 5 to 8 pieces of annotated evidence. And if you've done, and you will have done, a GTPA or a TPA, you'll go, oh, annotated evidence. I remember that from the trauma section of my brain from when I graduated. But I find it personally less of a burden doing Proficient Accreditation than the assessment was at the end of my degree.
100%. I remember having that exact thought, that doing my GTPA was much harder, much more intense and more stressful than my Proficient Teacher Accreditation process was by far.
And NESA actually gives a really detailed evidence guide. There's a 12-paged PDF on the NESA website that goes into extreme detail on different types of evidence that you can include. There's also there's like 7 or 8 types of evidence on the website itself with examples of annotations. And you don't need to reference any like journal articles or anything like that. You just need to reference which teaching standards you're saying that this evidence applies to. And what is really important to remember is that together as a whole, your 5 to 8 pieces of evidence must reflect all 7 standards at the proficient level. And each individual piece of evidence should address between 2 and 4 standard descriptors. And in ETAMs, which is where you're going to be submitting all this evidence and all your annotations, it actually won't let you select any more than 4. So it is a hard minimum of 2, a maximum of 4 standards. And before we get into detail on the evidence, I'll just quickly go through the rest of the process. Step number 4 and step number 3, so collecting your evidence and doing the observation report can happen concurrently, which is what's happening with me. So I'm halfway through collecting my evidence, but my principal observed my lesson this morning. There is an official NESA template that you need to fill out where you will plan your lesson. You'll say these are the 2 to 4 standard descriptors that this lesson is going to address. Here's what I'm going to teach. Here's the planned impact of that teaching. In that same document on the next page, your supervisor will write down their observation. After that, you write a reflection. You both sign it, and that is a major part of your submission. And then step number 5, you submit it. Give yourself a pat on the back. Buy yourself a sweet treat.
I've heard people say recently, because the accreditation process has changed quite significantly since when I did it in 2021. But I have heard people say recently that they need to upload much more than 5 to 8 pieces of evidence. When I did my accreditation, there was an option to upload, like, say, up to 15 to 20 pieces of evidence, and then your supervisor was sort of meant to go through them and pick your strongest pieces of evidence. So I guess I just wanted to flag that as I'm not sure whether ETAMS is still set up in that way or whether you've noticed that, Grayce.
I think I can upload 30 pieces of evidence.
Okay.
But if your evidence is addressing, if each piece of evidence is addressing 2 to 4 standard descriptors, you do not need any more than 8. I am working with 8 right now, and I've got a standard matrix, which I will explain later. That is very helpful. And I have addressed almost every single standard descriptor in all 7 standards using 8 pieces of evidence.
It's totally achievable. I'm pretty sure I ended up only with maybe 6 pieces of evidence in the end. But if your school or if other people are telling you that you need to collect like 25 or 30 pieces of evidence, please do not panic. And if your supervisor or someone is telling you that, maybe challenge, the purpose behind that, because it's a lot of work to go through and annotate that many pieces of evidence when the actual requirement in New South Wales is 5 to 8. And if, like Grayce said, if you're demonstrating multiple standards per evidence piece, which you need to, there's absolutely no reason for it to blow out by that much. So, take care of yourself and the amount of time that it takes to invest in doing all of this. And, think about your strongest 5 to 8 pieces of evidence and just go with those.
And in that vein, I would love to talk about briefly the standards matrix that one of the teachers at my school very kindly provided to me that she used to plan her accreditation in 2023. Basically, it's a table. You write out all the standards and all the standard descriptors. So standard 1.1, physical, social and intellectual development and characteristics of students, or 3.3, use teaching strategies. And down the bottom, you list, I want to have a program of learning as a piece of evidence. I need an email with a parent. I need minutes from this meeting. I need an assessment or whatever. And then you just go through and say, well, the email with a parent is going to address standard 4.3 and 7.3 and 3.7. So done. I've just ticked 3 standard descriptors off. And so it's just a visual of, this is the specific piece of evidence. These are the standard descriptors it addresses. And then if you've got any holes, it's very easy because those are literally the blank parts of your document where you go, I actually haven't addressed anything in standard 7 yet. I need to think about what's a quality piece of evidence that potentially already exists. Please don't go making random things up that I can use for my evidence. And honestly, this has really helped. And it actually made me feel better because just off the top of my head, I went, obviously a unit of work or a lesson plan. I have put in, with all personal information redacted, a parent email chain. I've put in a report, a student's report from last year. we do some peer coaching, which is kind of like a mentoring feedback kind of system. And I wrote some reflective notes. The piece of evidence was my notes reflecting on a video of my teaching that one of my colleagues had taken, noting their feedback, my thoughts, and then I annotated that. Like, it doesn't have to be super hi-fi. And the colleague who provided me with this matrix, she said, Grayce, do not spend too much time on this because you can let it take over your life until it's done. You only have to write the maximum of 3,000 characters on ETEMs. And 3,000 characters is like 400, 500 words. Like, you don't need to write essays for this. I'm writing about 3/4 of an A4 page as my annotation for each piece of evidence. And you really don't need to go into copious amounts of detail. You need to be clear, but being clear and concise and succinct is preferable.
Yeah. I'm just having a look now at my folder of evidence, and I did actually only have 5 pieces. But yeah, things like a letter that I sent out to parents in an email about food allergies because I was a food technology teacher. And so I used that to talk about standards 4 in terms of making sure that students were safe and that I was abiding by school and curriculum legislative requirements, but also about how I was establishing and maintaining respectful and collaborative relationships with parents. So it really didn't require heaps. I've got some like arrows and text boxes kind of annotating, really, really similar to the way you would have annotated evidence in your TPA or GTPA or similar, like you said before. And most of, maybe half to 3/4 of an A4 page of typed notes that kind of explain how the below piece of evidence meets the standards. I think one of the biggest things that people get hung up on is how do I present it and how do I lay it out and, where do I start? And I 100% have to agree with the matrix way of approaching just starting. I did a really similar thing where I mapped out the standards and I just read through them and then kind of went, okay, what do I already do that meets this? I know I have parent communication and I know I've done registered programs where I've noted differentiation and I know I've got this and I know I've got that. And like we said at the start, you probably are already doing a lot of the things that they're looking for. So you don't really need to prepare to do heaps of extra. So start by just mapping that out, absolutely. And we've got a similar matrix to help you get started on this planning process if you've been umming and ahhing about whether you should start your Proficient accreditation journey, because it is just one of the simplest ways to go, okay, what do I have? And then if you look at something and realize that you're kind of lacking a particular standard, then you know that over the next few weeks, you can plan to really intentionally create tangible examples of how you do that thing, which for me, I'm pretty sure was like standard 5, because maybe at that point I hadn't written many assessment tasks myself. So I then actually put my hand up in our next sort of faculty meeting to say, hey, can I write the assessment task for this upcoming, a unit, because I would like to collect evidence of that. So just an approach like that, I think, really provides a little bit of clarity about where to begin, because it is overwhelming and there's so many documents and there's so many web pages and there's so many people who are trying to tell you how to do it. Just start with a simple table and think about, what do I already do? Because at the end of the day, if you're going for your Proficient Teacher Accreditation, you're probably a proficient teacher.
Yeah.
So you will have the things to be able to demonstrate that.
It's basically quality teaching practice.
Exactly. The other thing I highly, 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 highly recommend, cannot recommend strongly enough, is find 2 or 3 other people in your school, or at least in your social circle, who is doing the same thing or who is ready to go for their Proficient accreditation, and host a proficiency party. This is one of the things that me and a couple of my friends did, and it was honestly the best thing ever, because we just said, okay, in these school holidays, we're going to have a proficiency party. We went over to someone's house. We had like lunch and snacks and tea and all the things. We didn't really chat. We just sat there and worked on our annotations, And it was so good because you were just doing it with someone. Anyway, proficiency party, it was so good. We sat down probably for 4 or 5 hours and most of us got all our annotations done, or like majority of our annotations done in that period of time. And because we were there, we were accountable to each other to be there and be working on that thing. It was easy. So highly recommend finding someone in your school who's also going through or about to go through the process at the same time. And if there's not, maybe even reach out to us.
Yeah.
And we can try and connect you with some other people who are also teachers going through the same thing, because it is so, so helpful to go through the process with someone else and just have essentially an accountability partner.
I wanted to take this opportunity to shout out my beautiful friend Adora, who listens. Hello, Adora. If you're listening to this in your car on the way to work, I hope you're driving very safely and I will see you soon. And beautiful Adora is actually she's my proficiency partner. She was the one who approached me last year and was like, are you doing proficiency? Let's do it together. We've had a variety of very informal catch-ups in her classroom and my classroom where we've talked about, like, we've gone through the standards and gone, oh yeah, we could probably use this piece of evidence for this standard because it already exists, or this is what we're doing, or whatever. And we approached my principal together, and I was a very eager beaver and got my observation done super early. And Adora hasn't gotten up to that bit yet, but it's just really nice, like you're saying, to go through this with someone who knows exactly what it's like, because they're at the same point in their teaching career as you. And it's just really nice to have a shoulder to metaphorically cry on. Hopefully this process, it should not be overwhelmingly stressful and burdensome, because it's really just documenting what, like we've said a million times already, what you're already doing. And having Adora to do that with in my specific circumstance has been really helpful. And just to talk out, like, what were you thinking of doing this? Or can I just talk you through my lesson plan that I'm thinking of doing for my observation? What do you reckon? And just getting that professional but friendly advice from someone who is a professional. We're all professionals. We've gotten our degrees. Like, we do know what we're doing, but we're just a little bit newer. So yeah, thanks, Adora. Love your work. Love you so much. Thanks for listening. And before we move on from evidence, I did want to stress that you don't need to worry about writing in a particularly academic way. Words failed me. Just write in plain English, because you don't have a lot of words really. And whoever is reading your annotation just really wants to know, have they met the standards?
And have you understood what the standard is actually asking for?
So just very briefly, how I've structured my evidence is I've started by explaining the context in which the evidence was created. So for example, for my team meeting minutes, I've said these minutes were created in a meeting that is held every week at my school. This is the purpose of the meeting. Here's what we talked about, and here is how these meeting minutes address these standards. Here's why I've chosen it as evidence, basically. And on the NESA website, the annotation examples, kind of like references, they have the standard descriptors like 2.1.2 or 6.3.2 in brackets, kind of like you're referencing the standard that you're trying to address, which is just something that I noticed. But yes, please just write in plain English, be as clear as possible, explain the context of the evidence, so how and why it was created at your school, and then why you've chosen it basically to address these standards. And once you've done that, you'll probably find that you're getting through that character count quite quickly. And yeah, just please take my colleague's advice. Don't overthink it. Don't spend too much time on it, please. And just one final bit of advice from your Auntie Grayce. In the same vein as don't overthink it, don't create or fabricate evidence to meet certain standards, because I'm sure that will be obvious. But authentic teaching really speaks for itself. You might design a certain lesson to generate a particular type of evidence. For example, if you're struggling with Standard 5, which is assessment like Sarah was talking about, maybe you think, for this lesson, I'm going to specifically ask the students to do this thing so that I have like a tangible piece of evidence I can use. But yeah, please don't go manufacturing anything, because your teaching is wonderful as it is. You are a professional. You've already graduated university. You are accredited either conditionally or provisionally. And your students are lucky to have you. So thank you for doing the great work that teachers do. I say as a teacher, very biased, patting myself on the back. But yeah, don't overthink it. Doesn't have to be perfect. Does have to be genuine.
I think you've done a beautiful summary, Grayce.
Thank you.
Before we wrap up, did want to spend just a couple of minutes quickly comparing some of the other states' processes. Like we said earlier, all of this is based on the Australian professional standards for teachers, so it's going to have a very similar vibe, but there are variances in how long you can take to do the process, how long you need to have been teaching to do the process, and who sort of governs the process. In terms of length of time, for example, in Victoria, you need to have been teaching for 80 days before you can apply for your Proficient Teacher Accreditation and sort of start that process. But they do also have a shorter turnaround time where you are expected to be fully registered within 2 years. In Victoria, the gathering of evidence process is actually based on an inquiry process. And so there's like quite a specific cycle or approach, but they have some very well put together guides on the VIT website about how to go about collecting your evidence and what you should be looking for. But at the end of the day, it's a really similar process. You're trying to look for evidence that demonstrate your professional practice and match what you do against the proficient standards. They also have heaps of templates and checklists that you can use, and some really useful PDF guides. We will link all of these in the show notes so that you can quickly and easily find the info that is relevant to your state. In South Australia, you've got 5 years to transition from provisional to full registration. And they also have a really similar process where you have to collect a portfolio of evidence, engage an evaluator or a supervisor, like we call them, and produce evidence to show that you've done a minimum of 200 days of teaching. So like collect a statement of service from the schools or school you've been working in to say how long you've been teaching and how many days you've done. And then you complete the application with the Teacher Registration Board there. In Queensland, it is a little different again, but you have to have completed a minimum of 1 year as a teacher, and they define that as 200 days. In Queensland, registration or accreditation is governed by the Queensland College of Teachers, and they have a really handy quick start guide that sort of shows how to log into their online portal and what kinds of things you need to prepare. Essentially, the teacher provides the evidence to a reviewer, and the reviewer then assesses their evidence against the standards. And if they're happy with that, then registration will be approved. So it all follows, each state essentially is going through a similar process. And like I said, we'll link in some relevant docs for all of the different places and jurisdictions where you might teach to the show notes. But essentially, you're collecting your evidence and you're proving how you meet the standards, and you wouldn't be going for your Proficient accreditation unless you are meeting those proficient standards, so you shouldn't have anything to worry about.
If you're working toward your Proficient Teacher Accreditation, we would love to hear about it. Please share your experience with us on Instagram or Facebook. We are at Teaching Together, the podcast. We would love to provide moral support from wherever you are in the world, in the country. Probably not the world, because that's not Australian accreditation, but we are your cheerleaders and we would love to hear how you guys are going. And if you found today's episode helpful, give us a 5-star review and follow along wherever you get your podcast. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time.
Bye.